Natalie Winkler of Salvestrin Estate Winery. It is an honor to have you here today on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, it's incredible to have you here. And there's a few things that I wanted to shout you out for right out of the gate. And for one, you have some Spanish training. You were in Spain and you were studying and you were learning all these things about old world wines. And so that's one of the things that I love about the fact that I'm having you here today is I haven't had anybody on the show that really has that experience, that has really gone and studied that old world and been a part of that. And so I really love that you've had that. And I'm excited to talk about that today. I'm excited also to talk about the fact that you're really big into organic, biodynamic, regenerative farming. And you've been doing that for so many years. I think that's a standout for you. And it's definitely something that a lot of people, if they pay more attention and do the right thing, we can all make a difference. And you're leading the way in that. And I also wanted to shout you out because you sent me a postcard. It's a holiday postcard. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because these kinds of things are so special to me. And you hand wrote and you said, Michael, thank you for the opportunity to talk winemaking on your podcast. I look forward to our chat. I'm never, ever going to lose this. I will always have this. Handwritten note cards mean the world to me. So whether it's your time in Spain or your focus and your attention on the environment or just your attention to detail, I just want you to know this is why I'm so excited to have you here today on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm glad you appreciate the snail mail note. It's a novelty these days.
I know, right? Nobody does that anymore. We're all focused on Fast and Go and Amazon and Prime. If it's not here tomorrow, it's like, where is it at?
It's very true. It's very true.
So I want to talk and jump right in about your growing up. I know when you went to school at Oregon, you were studying for Spanish and political science. But before you went to school, were you ever surrounded with wine? Was wine a part of your family growing up?
No, not at all. I grew up in Kansas City, a little suburb of Kansas City, and there was a lot of agriculture around, but wine was really not part of my growing up whatsoever. And I got into the wine industry by pure dumb luck.
Yeah.
So I was going to the University of Oregon. I was in my junior year and I just applied to a part-time job at a wine bar called Uva. And I had just got done doing a backpacking trip and had done this Camino de Santiago in Spain and walked through some vineyards and had really just loved the feel of basically this backpacking trail goes right through Spanish wine country. And so I came back and was like, oh, this is cool. Saw this ad for this job, applied, wrote that in my cover letter. That won them over. And I just dove headfirst into the wine industry. It was a really cool little hip bar ahead of its time because it closed a few years later, but there was 30 wines by the glass, hundreds of bottles on the wine list. And we changed the flights every month. And so I was able to try all of these wines from all over the world. And it was fabulous. And it was at that moment while I was working there, I was like, oh, like wine is actually an option for a career. Because like a lot of kids that go to school, you study something, but you don't really know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And there's this aha moment where it's like, oh my gosh, like I could do wine. And at that point, I thought I was on the master sommelier path. Like that was what I thought I wanted to do.
Right.
And then my mentor at the time, Philip Patty, said, you should go work harvest in Spain. Like you're already fluent in Spanish, you already studied abroad, you should go back. And he put me in touch through distributors. And I was able to land an internship at a winery called Bodega Elias Mora in Dodo.
Mm-hmm.
And my first harvest was 2009. I had a wonderful experience making Tempranillo there. And I just really never looked back. Signed up for classes, completed the program. At that time, it was a lot easier to start studying than get a work permit because I was completely unqualified.
Yeah.
But they took me anyway. I think really just because I said I was fluent in Spanish, that was really my only skill set and was willing to work hard and physical. I have very fond memories of being there and loved it and really just stayed on. And I love Spain. Spain has a very special place in my heart.
Yeah, you had this fluency in Spanish. And I think a lot of times, one of the things that would frighten me if I was going to go work at a winery in Spain or Italy or France would be the language barrier. That would be something that would be a big challenge to me because communication, that's huge. You were already on that, and you're already a hard worker as it is. So I feel like you had one of the hardest things already figured out.
I feel like it was like lucky too, like right place, right time, right opportunity. Had a super positive experience. The winery that I worked at was run by women, which is very rare, especially
Mhm.
in Spain. And they totally took me in and showed me everything and were super supportive in every way. And I at that point I was like, oh, I'm gonna grow grapes and make wine.
So when you were in Spain and you're surrounded with all these people, and especially too when you were working at the wine bar, do you feel like the people were also inspiring you to get into wine, not just the love for the wine, especially the culture in Spain?
Definitely, that wine bar was fabulous, and the sommelier there, Philip Patty, is still a very dear friend of mine, and he was the one that was like, "You should work harvest." Mainly because he said, "If you wanna be a sommelier, that's great, but a lot of times there's this knowledge gap where they don't really know how wine is made and they haven't worked a harvest." He said, like,
Mhm.
that if you wanna pursue, that's awesome, but you should start boots on the ground, get a real feel and firsthand experience of how wine is actually made, and then you'll be able to talk about it with experience that a lot of people in the wine industry don't have. And
Yeah.
then I just basically got there and I never looked back.
When you were in Spain, by the way, and you did these internships, did you also stick around and get your viticulture and enology, your master's in viticulture and enology before you came back to California?
Yes.
Oh,
I a hybrid situation at that time. So I was there, I went to class. It was in Ribera del Duero in Valladolid, which is right next to Toro.
uh-huh.
I did a lot of those classes and then after I came back, they let me finish it at do my thesis and finish it at a distance program, which was like the first time that they had allowed that. But I did
Oh,
most of
okay.
my studying on site there, but I was able to write my thesis paper and complete like the final project at home.
Nice. You find yourself back in California and you're in Russian River, you're in Hillsburg.
Yep.
And I feel like this is where it all started to click. I feel like this is probably where it was like, this is what I'm going to do. This is everything that I've been. Obviously, you're focusing on your degree. Would you agree that it really started to unfold for you coming from no background in wine? And here you are now, you're engulfed in this culture, you're engulfed in these people and these wines. Was this kind of the moment where you started to realize back in California? And did you think you were going to stay in California or did you think you were going to go?
Oh no, I knew. I was like head first into wine. Like when I came back from Spain, I went home briefly to stay with my dad for a couple weeks and then basically just looked for an internship in Sonoma wine country because there are a lot more opportunities in Sonoma and Napa than anywhere in the country. And then got a viticulture internship in Russian River Valley
Yeah.
and then just took off from there. So I worked at Windsor Oaks for an internship in the vineyards and then went to Mill Creek Winery outside of Healdsburg after that. So yeah, I just dove in and was like, "Hey, California's where I'm gonna move." And I didn't really have a full plan at all. I
Yeah.
didn't single person when I moved to Sonoma County. I knew
Yeah.
nobody. I called this lady who like had a room for rent on Craigslist and was like, "Hey, I'm coming out." She's
Yeah.
okay. And
That's how,
I don't think she really expected me to show up because people on Craigslist are usually nobody does that. People say that and they're like, "Oh, okay." But no, I actually showed up and she was like, "Oh my God." She was surprised.
the
But
days of Craigslist. I don't think people mess with Craigslist anymore,
I
but I
don't
used
think
to live
anybody
on.
yeah, that definitely dates me, but this was back in, early 2010.
Yeah. I remember I was looking for, I guess technically Craigslist is responsible for me getting a restaurant job in Nashville, Tennessee that introduced me to wine.
There you
You know,
go. It has its place.
it does have its place. You'll find some good deals, but now Craigslist is not where you go. Craigslist is creepy now, I think.
It's definitely scam city there.
Yeah. So you're back in California and you end up going to Westwood Wines.
Mhm.
And at Westwood Wines, was Philippe Melka and Mayan Kashitsky, were they consulting there when you were there?
No, that was pre-meltdown.
Okay.
So when I worked there, the consultant was David Ramey,
Oh, cool.
which was great because I've learned working with David Ramey and Ben Kane was the head winemaker. I learned more from Ramey than anybody else I've ever worked with. He's a master at his craft and unrelenting in his pursuit of excellence and quality.
Yeah.
I feel very privileged to be able to work with him very closely for 3 years. So he taught me a lot about Pinot Noir, about Chardonnay, about Cabernet,
Mhm.
just quality winemaking protocols in general. He helped me develop my palate. Yeah, I'm still friends with David today. We just went out to lunch a couple months ago. He's probably one of my biggest mentors in the wine industry, and I feel very lucky to continue to be friends with him and have him mentor me. Whenever
Yeah.
I have any questions, I email David.
When you were working at Westwood Wines, you ended up meeting Philippe Cotteret.
Mhm.
And this is one of your biggest parts of your story, I think. One of the best parts of your story is the fact that you got involved in biodynamic farming and really into the organic regenerative process. Was Philippe the one that kind of introduced this to you? Were you interested in it at all?
Let's rewind just a little bit. When I was at Mill Creek Winery outside of Healdsburg, located in Drake Valley, I was the vineyard manager and assistant winemaker. And during my 4 years there, I spearheaded a lot of more sustainable practices in the vineyard. We did some sheep grazing. We put up owl boxes. I was very interested in organics, trying to substitute our fertilizer for all organics. And I approached Philippe Cotteret in 2012 and asked if I could meet him, if I could learn from him. And he said, let's meet for coffee and see. And
Yeah.
so we met, and I basically offered to work for him for free if he
Hmm.
would teach me about biodynamics. And Philippe has been doing biodynamics as long as I've been alive. He started in 1987, and he's been a vine grower his entire life, and he comes from a very long line of vine growers in France. I joined Westwood and talked Westwood into bringing Philippe on as the
Oh,
vineyard
cool.
so that we could work together side by side, which was fabulous.
Wow.
And we transitioned the Annandale Gap Vineyard, which is the estate vineyard. It's in Santa Rosa off of Highway 12 in Sonoma Valley, from conventional to biodynamic and organic in 3 seasons.
Wow.
Vineyard was a lot of Pinot Noir and Rhone varietals, Syrah, Grenache, Roussanne, Marsanne, a little bit of Viognier, a lot of
Hmm.
Pinot, Mourvèdre, Tannat, Pinot.
Yeah.
And that was a very fun project. So I learned a lot. Is like a 3-year crash course, and going from fully conventional to fully biodynamic in that short amount of time was, I learned a lot about farming. So
Now,
that's how I met Philippe, and we're in close contact to this day. He still teaches me.
yeah. So would you say that as a consultant that you're still doing this for other wineries today? You go and pretty much consult people on how to reach higher standards for biodynamic and organic farming.
I try to be a spokesperson for that because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. Day to day, I'm the viticulturist and winemaker here at Salvestrin. I do talk with people and help walk them through what it looks like to go from conventional to organic, regenerative, biodynamic.
Right.
Because what I see as a professional winemaker is the quality of the wines goes up. Because if you're farming organic, regenerative, and or biodynamic, your attention to detail, it's a requirement. And so
Yeah.
that entire thing, you have to be a better farmer if you're farming organic, regenerative, and or bio. And yes, I definitely, that's something that I'm very passionate about. And
Yeah.
here at Salvestrin, when I started, we were conventional, and now we're organic and regenerative. We're not biodynamic here, but trialed it at a vineyard that's not our estate vineyard. And maybe someday that'll happen. But for now at Salvestrin, I'm happy that we're doing organic and regenerative practices. And everybody's comfort level is different. Like some people just want to take that leap from conventional to organic, and that's great. And some people want to go organic and regenerative. And then some people want to take it a step further and go with biodynamic. Yeah, it really depends on what the comfort level is. And it can be a long process. But you have to be very thoughtful about it when you're transitioning vineyards, because if you change everything at once, the vines get stressed. And
Yeah.
then see yield dips. You can see canopy stress. There's a lot of things that can happen. So you have to be very methodical when you're
Hmm.
making changes in the vineyard. Anybody that's farmed for any amount of time knows that you can't just change everything overnight. So it's a long, slow process, but you can see tangible benefits in the first couple growing seasons for sure.
Yeah. That's super cool. And I like that you spearhead that and that your focus is very much about that. And of course, before we get into Sylvester, and Sylvester is organic, Napa Green, certified organic, and all these things that you mentioned, but you did have a harvest internship. You did a stint over in Chateau Fontenille. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
And when I was looking into Fontenille, it's actually interesting where it's located. It's like the northeast of the city of Bordeaux. Would
Yeah.
you call this like a right bank
It is right
to
bank.
Bordeaux?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So a lot of Merlot.
a lot
A
of
lot of
Merlot.
a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's in Fronsac, AOC,
Mhm.
just next to Pomerol and Saint-Emilion in that region.
And Aaron Pott, I think, had a lot to do with inspiring you to go do that.
I basically tracked Aaron down through a mutual friend, Elizabeth Tangney, who's the winemaker and director of viticulture up at Cornell.
Uh-huh.
She's mine. So she knew Aaron, and I was working at Westwood at the time. And I said, Elizabeth, I want to go work in Bordeaux. Like, who do I contact? So, oh, get in touch with Aaron Pott. Aaron and Elizabeth were working together at the time. So I went out to coffee with Aaron at Model Bakery in St. Helena and was like,
Uh-huh.
hey, really want to go work a harvest in Bordeaux. And he's like, okay, Michel Rolland's in town. We're meeting today for blending. Introduce yourself. And maybe if he likes you, you can go work over there. So I did it. My French is terrible. So I basically said, hi, I'm Natalie. And that was like, he speaks perfect English, but like, they had a lot of more important things to do than talk with Natalie. It's like a full on blending session. I'm just there to say, hi, can I get an internship in one of the chateaus you work with? He's like, oh yeah, sure. Super nice guy. And I learned a lot. I would say in Bordeaux, that was 2015 harvest. It was really cool to do that internship because at that point I had 6 harvests already.
Mhm.
And so I had a really good foundational understanding of what winemaking was. And I could get really into the nitty gritty details of why we're doing everything in the cellar, get it down what the I feel like when you first start making wine, you're just like, okay, this is how you do it. But every
Yeah,
single wine does things slightly differently. And really how you retain quality is in the fine details of how you do
totally.
every cellar practice. So like how you rack. There are so many small details with racking that are really important. So I actually knew the questions to ask, the details to pay attention to. And it all goes back to like details in farming too, details in the cellar. Like you have to be meticulous if you're going to try and make the greatest wines that you can. And like
Yeah.
my job as a viticulturist and winemaker is grow the best fruit we can and then not lose the quality along the way during the winemaking process. So when I went to Bordeaux, I did not speak very much French. I took like a crash course, but my French is awful. But
Yep.
luckily the winemaker there also spoke Spanish.
Oh, there you go.
I know, super lucky. So I'll ask him all of my technical questions in Spanish. And I learned a lot at Chateau Fontenelle, and that has influenced my winemaking in a big way.
You know what? That was actually my next question. Being in Bordeaux and making wines very similar at Salvestrin in California, so you have old world, new world. What were some of your biggest takeaways, very specifically speaking, about being the winemaker you are today because of that experience in Bordeaux?
It's a really good question. I learned a lot about extraction.
Yeah.
And Danny Rolland, in her own right, is a master at her craft as well, not just Michelle. But Danny was there every day. And so I could ask her questions too about winemaking. I developed a really good palate. I learned a lot about how to extract color and tannin and how those interactions are hugely important, when to pick, climate considerations when you're harvesting, time on skins. We're tasting these wines very regularly,
Yeah.
uh, both Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Merlot, and a little bit of Cab Sauv. And just the rigor with which we did everything, tons of dry ice, how processing. There was a lot of sorting. There
Yeah.
was on the sorting table, we're sorting clusters, sorting berries, everything. Anyway, it's all encompassing. So it's hard for me to pinpoint like what exactly. I just learned how to hone my winemaking practices to the nth degree. And I would go
Hmm.
home every night because I lived in a tiny little village called Cyan. I'm probably butchering that. And there were maybe 300 people in this village and I didn't know anybody. So I would go home and I would read the University of Bordeaux textbooks because they had those there. And the translated version, not French. And
Totally.
I would take notes, just notes, tons and tons of notes at night about what we did and why we did it. And I still refer back to those sometimes today. And
That's funny. I just interviewed Michael Cruz yesterday, and
okay,
Michael Cruz has a similar story. Like when he wasn't working in the cellar, he was constantly studying. And I feel like if you're going to get into this industry or you really find yourself passionate about this, like you have to put in that extra step. That's going to create more of an opportunity for you to not have your back against the wall, and you can be better at what you're doing.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're passionate about it, it's not a chore. I
No,
still
totally.
love to read about viticulture journals today. I was just reading about cover crops earlier this week. It's a constant evolution of learning. And
Hmm.
then I feel like I study a subject and then I feel like I understand it and then I put it aside for a few years and then it comes back up and I got to revisit it. And then you just go deeper on certain subjects too. So I'm a
Yeah.
total nerd. I love to learn. And I
Yeah.
realized after I got out of college, like, why am I still studying all the time? It's because I'm a nerd and I
Hmm.
worked over time to just embrace that. And that's great.
I love it. I love hearing that. I love seeing people light up for those that are watching on YouTube. It just shows that level of passion. And I think one of the things about the wine industry is there's this really deep passion, this connection, of course, to earth and of course to vineyards and viticulture and all that. But there's this passion that we connect with one another. And I think when people can see that and they can hear it in your voice, I think it's just another part of why you're such a great winemaker. And it's just another staple. And I love that. And I'm excited because we're here today to talk about Salvestrin. And if you look at Salvestrin, Salvestrin has a lot of rich history. You actually have one of the Dr. Crane vineyards, which is
Yes.
super cool. This vineyard was planted back in the 1850s, 1859, if I believe.
Yes.
And when you think about its establishment was back in 1932, but I really feel like it was back in 1913 when John Salvestrin immigrated from Northern Italy over to the US. And the story kind of started from there. And now you have Rich and Shannon who are doing an incredible job. And you have this historic property that's over 9 decades now that you guys have just been continuing to create this experience for all the people that consume and love your wines. So if you could talk to me a little bit about the history of Salvestrin, why we're here today. You've been the winemaker there since 2017. And also before 1994, I believe, is when the family was more or less just selling fruit. And it was
Correct.
at that moment that the first vintage occurred. And then you have the new winery in 2001. So the current story of Salvestrin is new, but the entire story is super cool. So talk about the history of Salvestrin and of course, what it's like to be a part of something with Rich and Shannon.
I would love to. So yeah, the Salvestrins purchased the property in 1932. It was originally planted in 1859, as you said, and the original vineyard was planted to Zinfandel, Carignan, Petit Syrah, a mixed field blend of Italian varietals.
Hmm.
And it's been farmed. So yeah, 1932. This is our 90. We're going into our 92nd growing season,
Yeah.
and over the years, it's been replanted a few different times. Rich Salvestrin has really designed this vineyard from the ground up. And now it's mainly Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cab Franc. There's a little bit of Sangiovese
Uh-huh.
to pay homage to the Italian heritage.
Totally.
We also just planted a little bit of Zinfandel, which is really important and really special, especially for the family because that genetic budwood is from the original vines here. Those are cuttings. They're not, we didn't source those from any nursery. Those are cuttings from the original Zin that was from the property in 1859. So those genetics are still here and alive and well. And we've got just like a little half acre to make a couple hundred cases for wine club. We also make Sauvignon Blanc and Petit Syrah.
Hmm.
And it's just a very special place. It's a 19-acre property. Dr. Crean's original home is here that was originally built in the 1870s. It's a 3-bedroom Victorian house. Ed Salvestrin, who is 86, still lives on property, and he farmed this when he was a young boy. So he's the son of John Salvestrin, and he's there on the back porch every day, just hanging out, looking at the vines. And we talk about the weather and the growing season. And I give him updates, and he's still putzing around on the John Deere Gator. And up until a few years ago, he was still driving the tractor.
Well,
And Rich and Shannon are wonderful. Rich is here every day, and as is Shannon. And Rich is the director of viticulture and also like signs off on all the winemaking decisions too. So we work side by side, and
yeah.
he has taught me a lot about farming. And although I come from more of a heavily emphatic, regenerative, biodynamic, organic background, Rich is very salt of the earth.
Hmm.
Set up this vineyard very thoughtfully, and he was very ahead of his time in that a lot of the trends that we're seeing come back, like the wider spacing, allowing for the vineyard canopy to go up and over to shade to
Hmm.
protect the fruit from these extreme heat spikes that are becoming more and more normal. The use of drought tolerant rootstocks like 110R, like
Yeah.
a lot of these things that are now very trendy, like Rich designed all of that from the ground up here 3 decades ago. And it's very meticulous in the vineyard. And so I feel, as a viticulturist and winemaker here, so lucky and blessed to get to work with this fruit. The Dr. Crane Vineyard is the estate Salvestrin Vineyard. And at its height, Dr. Crane owned about 300 acres of land in St. Helena. And from what I understand, at its pinnacle, it was about 100 acres planted. And over time, that's been sparsed out and sold off to different families. St. Helena High School was on original Dr. Crane
Yeah.
land. Dr. Crane Park was originally, there's all the names come from this Dr. Crane figure who was one of the first 5 people to plant grapevines in all of Napa Valley.
Wow.
He was a pioneer in his day. And they found a time capsule in the wall of his old Victorian house that has Steve's Hardware receipts from like the 1860s, like crazy stuff.
Wow.
So there's this rich history here that is really special. And I feel honored to be a part of the team that's ushering that on and passing that down to the next generation, because as we all know, family wineries are getting more and more rare.
Mhm.
And this is something that's truly special. And for us to be able to control everything from growing of the grapes to making the wine, the entire process all the way through, is really important in crafting the great wines that we do. And we're the only winery and producer at the Dr. Crane Vineyard. Like, we're the only, there's plenty of other Dr. Crane Cabernets out there, but those are all purchased fruit. And yeah, and we transitioned to organic and regenerative practices, just some tweaks here and there, nothing drastic.
Mhm.
And so we've changed things slowly over time and tweaked the model, and it's really working well. And we're so thrilled with the quality of the fruit that's coming in the door, especially the 2023 vintage is looking fantastic. So that's definitely a
I
win
know.
for. But I'm so happy to be here and work with the fruit and make the wines here with Rich and Shannon.
You also have a new property, I think, in Hell Mountain.
So I don't know how you found that out. There's a property off of Ink Grade Road. It's a small property that we're hoping to develop about 7 to 10 acres. Part of it is in Hell Mountain, and then the other part is Poke Valley, because there's a elevation requirement with Hell Mountain. And we're
Uh-huh.
seeing what percentage is of what, but a decent portion of that, those plantable acres, should be Hell Mountain fruit
Yeah.
that we're going to design from the ground up, which I'm very much looking forward to that.
Right.
And learn a lot about that process. I've done plenty of replants in my day, but designing everything, it's like a blank slate. And if you're into viticulture and farming, it's like kid in a candy shop. Oh
Yeah.
my, it's really cool. And to see the process and be a part of that is really exciting too. But we might get fruit from that in 2030, because
Yeah.
vineyards take a long time to put in, and we're still in the permitting process. But that
Uh-huh.
is in line, because we want to control all the fruit from the ground up, because that's really where you get your quality, is having an internal farming crew, planting everything, farming everything, and making all of that into wine. Because if you're outsourcing the fruit, then you have less control over the ultimate quality that comes through the door.
Mhm. When you think about your wines, I feel like originally you were estate, but I feel like now you have some different wines. Is there a wine that in particular, like your Russian River Pinot Noir, for example, but is there something that really speaks to you personally that kind of stands out to you when you think about your portfolio, whether it's on the estate or whether you're sourcing it from somewhere else?
I think that the grapes that we grow here, the Dr. Crane Vineyard, are so special.
Yeah.
Sounds very cliche, but like our estate Napa Cab it's our flagship for a reason. It's
Hmm.
usually 85 to 90% Cab. There's some Merlot, there's some Cab Franc in there, and it really is a true expression of the site. And that's what we're trying to do here, is be very respectful of the fruit quality, let the site and terroir characteristics shine through
Hmm.
with our, I don't want to say minimum intervention winemaking, but we don't do unnecessary things to the wine. Our job is to shepherd the wine, not over oak it. Don't add anything to it. Just
Yeah.
unadulterated Dr. Crane pristine fruit, make that into wine, put it in the bottle,
Yeah.
because that's really where your site shines. And I love our Pinot. I came from a Pinot background at Westwood, and that was surprisingly an easy sell, because Shannon Salvestrin had wanted a Pinot for a really long time. And so I came on board, and I was like, Rich, we should make a Pinot. He's okay, sure. And I was surprised at how quickly
He
that
said, yeah.
was agreed to. But I didn't know that Shannon had been doing the work on the back end for a decade. And so I came in with this perfect this very harmonious, or whatever, the background that kind of paired with that desire to make a Pinot Noir. And
Hmm.
it's a few hundred cases. It's all wine club. It's from Russian River, but it's fun to make both because you're never going to grow Pinot Noir where you grow Cabernet. The microclimate and the soil, they're completely different.
Yeah.
So it's fun to be able to source a little bit of fruit here and there and make some wines just to keep it fresh. The thing that's near and dear to our hearts is the Dr. Crane fruit that we work with and farm every day here.
Hmm.
Sangiovese. Oh, I forgot to tell you about that. That's really special because there's not very much Sangiovese in Napa Valley. We have under 2 acres. We make a pure Sangiovese that's aged in all neutral oak and then a Retaggio Italian style super Tuscan blend. But last time I checked, and it changes every year, there's less than 150 acres planted in all of Napa Valley of Sangiovese. And so that's fun because when people are like, oh my God, you guys make Sangiovese? And it's killer. It's like a really fun new world expression of that grape.
Hmm. When I was at Staglin, when I was an intern in 17 when you became
Oh, nice.
winemaker.
Okay.
And they have estate Sangiovese because of their Italian background. So
Great.
that's pretty cool. Like thinking about that percentage, Staglin is one of those as well. So it's
I
cool
did
to
not
hear.
know that. I'm gonna have to, yeah, I'm gonna have to contact their winemaker. I know him to
Oh
create
yeah,
some
Frederick. Yeah.
competitive tasting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's incredible. So it's great to hear how we bring some of these Italian varietals to California and because of family, because of history and all these things come together and you get to taste these great wines and you get to tell those stories. And I think that's really cool. And when you think about Rich, and you were mentioning something earlier about rootstock, and I know Rich's background in nurseries and
Definitely.
especially too his extensive knowledge in rootstock. What's one of
Yep.
the things that you have taken away from Rich as far as that's concerned that has made you a better winemaker as a result?
There's a lot that I've learned from Rich, especially on the farming side. Rootstock, definitely. It is one of the most important decisions that you make when you're planting. Looking at how to pair rootstock characteristics with your soil texture, your drainage, what you're wanting, the level of fertility. Is it a high vigor or low vigor site? And those have an inverse relationship. Are you trying to grow? What's your density and your spacing? Your aspect, your orientation, topography. There's a lot that goes into that. And Rich
Right.
has talked a lot about rootstocks. And I pick his brain all the time because he was able to work with almost every rootstock that exists. And there's no manual on rootstocks. I have tried to find one because there's just these charts that the nurseries put out, but really what it comes down to is your experience, and you don't really know a lot about a rootstock unless you've farmed it and worked with it, and Rich has had the opportunity to farm and work at the nursery and see those vineyard plots develop. So he has a wealth of knowledge with rootstocks and farming in general. He's taught me a lot about vine balance. So when I first started working here, I always assumed, like a lot of winemakers do, that less fruit is better quality, and that's
Right.
definitely not true. It depends on the site. What does the site want? Every single farming site has an optimum yield that it wants to give for quality. And here at the Dr. Crane Vineyard, it's a fertile site. It's got deep, kind of sandy loam soils. And there is no problem with us hanging 4.5 tons to the acre out here. And we have to,
Mhm.
because what happens if you don't and you cut off too much fruit is that you get ripeness too quickly. You get way too much sugar without the phenological ripeness and the flavors that you want. So you need that fruit load to temper the rate of ripening. If there's not enough fruit, the vine is not balanced. And so all the metabolisms that need to happen, not just with the chemistry, but with flavor too,
Mhm.
it's really important that you have the appropriate crop load on the vine that the vine wants. And we have on our older plantings, which were planted in 95 and 97, it's 10 by 6, 10 by 7 spacing. They have massive roots. They have a massive root zone, and they're big, thick trunks. They're healthy. And so they need a decent amount of crop on there so that they have an nice, even ripening trajectory. And so that's definitely one big thing that Rich has taught me. He's taught me a plethora of things about viticulture and winemaking. And we make a really good pair.
Yeah.
We might have a different what I love about working with Rich is we have a different approach. Like, I'm very emphatic about biodynamics. Rich is definitely not. And that's
Yeah.
fine because at the end of the day, like, he's definitely more like, I am in the science camp, and I'm like, biodynamics, there is science coming out to support these things. But and sometimes we have these very spirited discussions about that. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it doesn't like how I like to think about biodynamics is it's like the cherry on top of the cake. The most important thing about farming is like the fundamentals,
Mhm.
be a good farmer. Farming organic is important and getting rid of the conventional chemicals and the synthetic fertilizers and the herbicides and the things that really do harm soil microorganisms and soil health. Like you need to build up your soil. But at the end of the day, the thing that's most important about being a good farmer is paying attention,
Mhm.
being observant, being out in your vineyard regularly. And if we're doing regenerative and organic, like that's enough. And so bringing this back full circle, because I'm going down a rabbit hole, is I love working with Rich because we have the same goal, right? We might not agree on how to get to the goal, but the goal is to grow the most premium fruit possible and make the most excellent wines that we possibly can from this site. And so we might not agree on exactly how to get there, but because we have that same goal, we're willing to look at different avenues on how to get there. And I think because that's our goal and we keep trying to raise the bar every year, our wines just keep getting better.
When you think about organic and biodynamic and regenerative practices and all these things that you've been talking about, what's the number one thing that you think you're doing as you lead the way at Salvestrin? Or maybe that you changed. Let's say you were doing something one way and now you're doing it different. And also, how can I would say just winemakers, but even as a consumer, how can a consumer lessen the carbon footprint and do a better job with the way that they're approaching their wine experience from a consumer standpoint? So that's a twofold question. So what's something that you have done to lead the way? Maybe you changed something. And what's something that consumers can do, for example, in a better way?
I think the elimination of herbicides is huge.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've done here. We've completely eliminated all herbicide use. And I think that's a really important key. From consumers, I think it's really important to support brands that are farming this way. I think that's the biggest way that you can vote as a consumer is to do your research and support wineries that are organic, that are
Hmm.
regenerative, that are biodynamic. And the wineries that are farming responsibly and not just saying they are, but that they actually are,
Yeah.
that speaks volumes and really will help the trajectory. It will push the envelope and it will make more vineyards go that way if the
Yeah.
consumers are consciously supporting those brands more than your conventionally farmed sites. And I feel like with the younger generation of wine buyers coming online, that is the next most important thing is
Hmm.
we have to be responsible stewards of the land. And I don't want to paint this picture of Salvestrin wasn't before I came on, but we've done small changes along the way to
Totally.
honor and more. And for them, it's super important because they live here. So this wasn't like a hard sell. It's, hey, let's look at this. Let's try these few things. And we've slowly changed things in the vineyard bit by bit over time. And they're 100% on board with that because there are several family members that live here and their daughters Hannah and Emma are starting to work here, and we're looking at trying to make sure that generational passing of the baton. It's a very long process, and it's by no means going to happen overnight. But starting to get the next generation of Salvestrins in here to make sure that we can be here for the next generations to come is really important, and to
Yeah.
preserve our soils so that we can continue to farm and have the quality that we do. You have to take care of this soil.
Yeah, I was interviewing Russell Bevan recently, and he was talking about how important it is to him. And he's talking about some of the younger generations in his family, and he imagines them running through the vineyards. And I don't want them running through the vineyards and there's all this crap and all this stuff. He didn't use those words, but basically, I'm paraphrasing that it was important to him. And the way you just described it, it put me in that conversation that I had with him and the importance when you look at it from like a personal standpoint, like another generation or a family member.
Cool.
And it's a real thing.
Well, and it's also I don't want to get too woo woo here, but you can feel the difference when you go into a vineyard that's farmed organic versus a vineyard that's sprayed with all kinds of chemicals and there's
Hmm.
nothing else growing but vines. I want to go into a vineyard and see a nice array of cover crops growing and ground cover and birds and insects. And vineyards are a monoculture, right?
Yeah.
So we can try to introduce biodiversity the best that we can. But at the end of the day, it's an agricultural product, it's farming. But we can try to make it more of an ecosystems approach when we invite other critters and fauna to be growing. And when you walk into a vineyard that is completely barren and has been tilled and sprayed and there's nothing there, like you can feel that it's
Yeah.
just, and it looks like a dead zone.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a difference. And anybody can feel that if you go into vineyards that are farmed that dramatically different side by side.
Would you say that in general, though, let's say in the past 20 years, Napa Valley and not just Napa, but Sonoma and other wine areas in North America, would you say that there's been an overall improvement, though, in the way that people are approaching this better way of winemaking, this better way of living, if you will?
Yes, I do. I see it changing. Is it changing as fast as I would like it to? No, but I'm always trying to change too fast anyway. I think it's good work with people that keep you in check because if I had it my way, I would change everything at once and then it would probably be a disaster. And I've learned a few lessons in farming that way from changing everything too quickly because you
Mhm.
can't. It's very important to be really thoughtful about your approach. But I have seen in Napa Valley and Sonoma County that there are more and more vineyards um, tweaking the way that they farm. And I think with the advent of more research to show, see the numbers to reflect the soil health and everything that's on with organic and regenerative agriculture, it's only going to push the envelope more. I think we all want to do the right thing. And when the research is really showing that those are tangible benefits, that it's following suit. So I do think that it is changing. I would like to see it change a little bit faster, but then we have wonderful organizations like Napa Green really spearheading that too and pushing that along, which is really great.
Yeah. When you look at your career, and especially to someone like you who has been to different places like Spain and France, and of course in California, when you were making wine or when you were interning or working in labs or things like that, is there something that you were maybe overlooking at the time where now, when you look at that same thing with the experience that you have under your belt, that you're so hyper focused on now that maybe you weren't as aware of or focused on in the past? And because you're more focused on that now, you look at that as something that makes you a better winemaker because of that?
That's a really good question. It's nothing in the labs. I really don't like lab work. But I think tasting a lot is really important. I do think tracking your fermentations really closely, tasting all the way through the fermentation process. I think it honestly, for me, it wasn't necessarily that I'm focusing on things differently. It's that I have the experience and the confidence to make good decisions that are critical, like when to harvest. There's decisions that you make that really dictate the quality of the wines. And those, for me, those big decisions are when to harvest, when to press off your skins, and then how you're aging. I'm a tinkerer. I'm a perpetual experimenter. And so we have lots that are on lees and others that are clean. And we still, after a few years of aging, haven't decided which one we like better. So we just split the Cabernet and we do half with lees and half
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
we like the aromatics of the clean rack versus the texture of the dirty rack. And then oak percentages too. I'm using less oak than I used to because I want and I think that comes with maturity in winemaking too, is you want the fruit to shine through and then being very thoughtful about what coopers we're using too. Like
Mhm.
we definitely changed a lot of the cooperages that we were working with to a less impactful barrel.
Yeah.
Because new oak is new oak, but all new oak is not created equal. There's some really intense new barrels that's all you smell and taste. And then there's more subtle barrels that really just support the fruit and the profile of the wine without overpowering it. And then just really, I think being observant in the vineyard is super important. Just being out there and really paying attention to how we're pruning, how we're shoot thinning, how we're eliminating leaves. I think all of those cultural practices that we do
Mhm.
regularly throughout the year, how you do them is super important. So I feel like in this entire process, because to me, I look at it as one process, and I know Rich does too, and a lot of people that I know that do both viticulture and winemaking. While that is rare, it's more common. It's more common in Europe, but you grow the grapes and then you make the wine, and it's very cyclical, right? So
Right.
every year we prune, every year we shoot thin, Every year we're suckering, we're pulling leaves, we're doing crop adjustments, but how are you doing it? Like, how do you make those decisions? And when you get down to it's a vine by vine basis. That's how we farm, right?
Mhm.
No two vines are pruned the same. No two vines are suckered or shoot thinned the same. And not just thinking about, oh, that's what we're forming the vine for this year. You're also thinking about next year
Yeah.
because those that you're making they don't just affect this year, they affect the following year. So
Right.
I think it really comes down to getting down to the meticulous nature of farming on a vine by vine basis, and then
Mhm.
also a lot by lot basis with winemaking, and constantly asking myself, is there a better way to do this? I think that really sets you apart from others in the field. Is there a better way to being open to the fact that you might not actually have the best way to do things? I
I
think
love
that's
that.
important. Like being open to being wrong.
Yeah.
Is there a better way to do this? I'm always curious. Like if there is, I definitely need to be won over, but I'm also open to the fact that I don't know everything. And my cellar master, Jorge, we've been working together for 9 years. And
Mhm.
sometimes he has a way better idea than I do about how to do it. And I'm like, if we're not losing quality and it's more efficient, then by all means. So being open to like input and learning, I think constantly learning, it comes back to that.
I love the fact that you just basically said you're not about an ego and you're very teachable. And I think that's huge. I think a lot of people, and when you think about failure, for example, I used to be so afraid of failure and I've run into the wall hard. If there's anybody that's hit the wall, face plant, fall back, everybody's looking at you, pointing the finger at you. That's me. So I know how that feels. But I think one of the things about failing and falling is how you get back up and how you
That's the
move
most
forward.
important part. If you're not failing, then you're not really testing life. And the most
Absolutely.
successful, happy people fail. Everybody fails. So you just
Yeah.
have to get through that fear. And it is exactly like you're saying. It's how you get back. It's how you respond
Mhm.
that makes you who you are.
Absolutely. And I love that is who you are. And that's the kind of person you are. When you walk into the winery to do your thing and to create the magic, you're not walking in there looking around, seeing if everybody's looking at you. You're walking in there with your team, ready to do everything together. And I think that's literally how you are. You mentioned something about when to pick. And I'm thinking about this vintage where I asked this question in a previous interview that's going to be released on this season, but I want to ask you this question.
Sure.
For this vintage, this was one of those vintages where at some point you guys had to just be sitting there like antsy, like you don't know what to do. You know what to do, but you don't know whether you should do it or not. So you're unsure because of the timing. So talk about how that felt like for you when to pick. And then
I know,
also
literally just sitting around for weeks, like with a very clean cellar.
I know,
Okay.
like any
Well,
time.
you know what? I have to remind myself in these situations that is a luxury. There was no climatic situation that pushed us to pick when we can sit back and just enjoy the hang time,
Uh-huh.
have that beautiful mid 80s, low 90s ripening weather like the entire time. That's literally a farming and winemaking dream. Like
Yeah.
nothing's pushing the envelope. Yes, eventually we're like, okay, so seriously, are we
Are we
gonna
doing this or not?
everything in November? Is this gonna happen? But it was wonderful. I can't tell you what a relief it is to have a normal, quote unquote, normal,
Yeah.
smooth harvest. And yes,
Yeah.
at the point you're like, we got to get started because what happens is everything is ripe at the same time. So in winemaking, like sometimes you have to turn the tank, meaning that you have to get something in, ferment it dry, press it, and to fill it again. When it's compact and everything ripens at once, that makes it very
Oh,
challenging
yeah.
from a spatial standpoint, especially with a small winery like us. We did 130 tons this year, and that's the biggest harvest we've ever had. So at a certain point, yes, you got to pick it. So, but it's for us, it's all about flavor. The numbers are always there, right? Like in St. Helena, it's a warm AVA in Napa. I'm never ever worried about sugar accumulation.
Mhm.
I'm looking at what are my acids? Have the
Yeah.
acids like what's the pH, what's the titratable acidity. But more than that, we pick on flavor. So it's like going out there every day, every other day, tasting berries. Is it ready? Is it ready? Is it ready? And when it tastes like, okay, it's turned the corner, and you make the call because
Mhm.
we have 48 hours notice to pick because we do have supplemental labor to help pick because we're so small. We only have a few vineyard guys.
Yeah.
And Pina Vineyard Management has been helping harvest here for 20 years. But it was wonderful to take our time. And yeah, and it was abundant too. It was a very abundant year and the quality was excellent and there was no dehydration and it was a very happy, joyous harvest and the potential for quality is excellent. It
Yeah.
reminds me of 2018 in
Yeah.
terms of taking dates and looking at the growing season, just how it was like even and just really ideal weather during the whole season, but especially during ripening and not being rushed to pick and a nice crop load that makes everybody happy.
When another question I had was like back in September-ish timeframe, when you were dropping some fruit, looking at how long the vintage lasted, was there a part of you that feels like you wouldn't have dropped as much fruit, or was it still the right thing to do?
It was still the right thing to do,
Yeah.
definitely. And we don't drop fruit if we don't need to. We don't even necessarily, we definitely look at it. We definitely do crop estimations. There are blocks that we drop fruit every year, but then there are blocks that some years it needs it and some years it doesn't. It just comes down to vine balance.
Hmm.
That comes down to experience. Like you look at the vine, does it look heavy? Is it not? What are the cluster weights? What are the cluster counts? Do our little math equation.
Yeah.
And Rich and I always joke because we have a running bet every year, like who's closer on crop estimate. And it's a wash. And I spend so much more time on my crop estimations, so much more time. And Rich just walks out there and looks at the vineyard. He's, looks like 4.25 tons a year. And he's as accurate or more accurate than me. It's like,
He's a legend.
I know, dude. And it's like, he's like, why do you do all of those calculations? I'm like, because it makes me feel like I'm more in touch with the vintage. Yeah, it probably would be as accurate for me to go out there and do the visual, but for me, I also just have to do the work. I
Yeah.
can't explain why. I just want the data, even if the data doesn't help.
You want to hear a funny story? So my
Yeah.
aunt is a Sicilian, hardcore. Hardcore's my wife's aunt. And when we're cooking, we'll cook some food, and my wife's an amazing cook. And we'll make some food, and we'll go to her house. And my aunt is taking the recipes, throwing them in, not measuring anything, just whipping it together. And then when we sit down and we eat, her food is like chef's kiss, the best. You can't even imagine. And we all look at her and we're like, how did you do that without, and we don't ask this every time, but we've asked in the past, how did you do that without the measurements, without the meticulous focus? And you just went in there and just said, boom. And then that's what it is. But you know what? She's an OG. Rich is an OG. That's
Yeah.
how they do it. And
That's how they do it.
these are the kinds of people that we want to learn from.
It's wonderful. And the thing that I love about viticulture and winemaking is a lot of it is science and data, and then a lot of it is artistic, creative, intuitive. So I love
Mhm.
that the field itself like fuses both because there's a time and a place for both. When you're putting together your wines and you're making decisions about some of the picking decisions, yeah, they are based on numbers, and our numbers definitely need to be within a certain parameter. But after that, it's really like a taste and a gut feel. Like, is it ready?
Yeah.
Okay, it's ready. You know what I mean? And same thing with pressing, same thing with blending. Yes, it's all about the tiny little percentages, 1% here, 0.5% there, but also it's almost like when you nail it, you just know. You
Yeah.
just taste it, right? Like when you're like, oh, is this ready to press? Or, oh, is this blend done? You taste it and you're like, that's done.
Mhm.
And I can't explain, there's no scientific explanation for that other than I tasted the other options or I tasted it yesterday and it wasn't quite there, but now it is. And you're like, how do you know that? I'm like, if you taste enough,
Yeah.
whether that's berry or whether that's wine, at a certain point, you just know.
Like it comes with experience. So like when you're on the front end of tasting and you think it's ready, it could have gone longer. That's one thing. But then
Mhm.
when on the back end, that it probably should have been, you should have moved forward earlier.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, you know where you're going and your taste bud starts to develop and you start to understand and your palate is more in tune. And that just
Mhm.
comes with experience.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I think it's funny. People are like, oh man, you must have an amazing palate. You're so talented. It's no, I just put in the hours. It's like any
Yeah.
skill, right? Any skill that you want to develop, you put in the hours, you'll get there.
Natalie, how can people learn more about you? How can they find you on social media, whether
Oh
it's
my gosh. Social
website,
media,
wine lists, and
all the
our mailing
things.
lists, everything?
Yeah. Natalie Jane Winkler is my Instagram handle, salvestrinwinery.com. you can find me. BD Vine Growers is my little consulting thing with viticulture on Instagram too. So
Yeah.
we can talk farming, we can talk winemaking. There's a lot there. So I'm
Oh,
around.
man.
Hit me
Yeah,
up.
that's one of the things that I keep saying is you're so knowledgeable in so many different facets of winemaking, and you've done so many incredible things in wine, and all of these links will be listed in the show notes to the podcast, so people that are listening right now can just go and click and learn more about you and follow you and connect with you and sign up for mailing lists and purchase wine. And with every podcast, I like to close it up with a final question. And with all your experience and the things that you've done in different places around the world, do you feel like California will always be home? Do you ever find yourself maybe wanting to do some projects from afar or at a distance in different parts of the world, or is this where it's at?
I love to travel. California will always be home.
Yeah.
Um, Healdsburg specifically, that's where my family is.
Yeah.
My young daughters and a loving husband, and we're super happy here. I love to travel. I love French culture. I love Italian culture. I love
Mhm.
Spanish culture. I'm not ruling that out. That'd be lovely.
Yeah. I
I
mean, that,
do. I do love California. I feel very lucky to be here and live in paradise and do what I love. And I feel every day I wake up and I'm like, wow, this is my life. And yes, I definitely co-created it, but at the same time, I can't believe I found it. It's like, how did you become a winemaker and viticulturist? I don't know. I literally just stumbled into it and was like, hey, this is cool.
yeah.
So I feel really, really blessed for that too. So
I like your optimism as far as it's one of those sky's the limit kind of things, but you're also in such a special place. And not only that, but you're attached to one of the most special families in Napa Valley and Rich and Shannon and that whole history of everything that they've been doing for, you think about 9 decades. We're
yeah,
talking about almost a century of all the things. And even before that, it's been more than a century. All of the hard work, the commitment, all of the things that when you look back at John and him and his wife Emma and everything they did to come here and create this incredible world. And then looking at it today, like you do have to pinch yourself. And I always, when I interview people, I'm always like, man, you guys are so lucky. And then I'll say, I do live a mile and a half away from the beach. So I got some pretty cool stuff too. But
yeah.
there's something special and incredible about wine and the people. And I just want to thank you today, having you on the podcast, getting to hear about your travels, getting to hear about the fact that you get to cultivate land in such a historic place with Dr. Crane, getting to hear you talk about the Salvestrins and all the things that you guys are doing in wine and in life and with biodynamic farming and organic farming. I think it's truly incredible. And I just want to thank you for reaching out to me. And thanks to Aaron Pott. Shout out to Aaron Pott. He
Yeah.
set
Shout
this
out to
up.
Aaron Pott. I love
Um,
and he's
it's
great.
been great having you on the podcast today, Natalie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you wanting to chat with me. This is great. I could talk with you all day. This is just nerding out.